Porcupine Tree have a decent sized discography, and due to this, some people may have different definitions of what does and doesn't constitute an album in their discography. For example, some people may include Metanoia as an album, but I don't, even though I have it on CD. I also won't be including things like Yellow Hedgerow Dreamscape, Recordings, Voyage 34, Nil Recurring, or Moonloop either. I'll also be going in chronological order, hence the name first last, and I'll be rating these out of 5 and giving my top 3 favourite songs of the album. I also talk a lot about instrumentals presented in some albums throughout this video, and while I'm sometimes critical of them, it's often a mood thing for me. Like, I'll like them more if I'm in a mood to listen to them. Otherwise, they just seem drawn out in some cases. The debut album, On the Sunday of Life, took a bunch of tracks from early cassette releases and put them on CD. For this reason, it is officially separated into 4 sections, which as a whole is a bit of a mess, honestly. Although there are some shining lights, despite most of the instrumentals being rather forgettable. Although, as a way of putting early material onto CD, it makes sense to include these, as it's part of the Porcupine Tree history. In the sense of it having multiple parts, it makes the album make more sense. Are the high points better than the low points? Well, it depends who you ask, but I could listen to Nine Cats forever. I'm going to give this 2 out of 5, and as for my top 3 songs from the album, in no particular order, as for every top 3 in this video, they would be Nine Cats, Radioactive Toy, and Linton Samuel Dawson, which I'm not sure if the initials are meant to spell LSD. I don't know if that's like coincidental or not. I know that Porcupine Tree were rather into kind of psychedelic rock and stuff at that point. I don't know if Linton Samuel Dawson is actually a person or what the go is with that. Although in saying that, it's fair to say that if the album grows on you, then I haven't listened to it enough. Basically, I listened to it once and saved the songs I liked on first impression. And I also want to give a shout out to Jupiter Island as well, because it's a pretty good song. The second album released was Up the Downstair, and while I'll be talking about the remastered version, I won't be talking about Staircase Infinities, which comes with the CD version that I have. I've also always been really confused about the way this album is set out on Spotify. It has 10 tracks for the album combined into 4, with the title track being the only single on Spotify. With the first track combining What Are You Listening To, Synthesia, Monuments Burn into Moments, and Always Never. The third track combines Not Beautiful Anymore, Siren, and Small Fish, and the last one features Burning Sky and Fade Away. Unlike the first album, the instrumentals suit this album and work well in the context of the album. The album feels complete and not so much of a mess. The first 3 or so minutes of the title track really gives me vibes of the album Samba Nova by Penal. While the album is messy in parts, it all seems deliberate and purposeful and seamless. Beautiful album, honestly. I could just put headphones in and lose myself in it, or even just a really good sound system in general. As much as I would like to just talk about this album for the rest of the video, I think you should just listen to it for yourself. But before we move on completely, let's talk about the rating and my favourite 3 songs. The album gets a 4 out of 5 from me, and my 3 favourites are Almost Never, Synthesia, and Fade Away. I won't lie, I only got this album because I love Stars Die. Maybe that says more about Porcupine's Tree ability to be compelling than me. Who knows? I don't have too many feelings outside of Stars Die being amazing, but here's my opinion anyway. It's why I made the video. Also, once again, I'll be talking about the remaster. I actually went and listened to the whole album again before writing this, so I had more to say than just Stars Die is amazing. Sky Moves Sideways, Phase 1 really shines in the sections that have vocals. It's a nice break from the instrumental elements, which are nice but seem daunting when you realise the track goes for 18 minutes. Although, as often is the case with the band, the track is rather atmospheric. Disclaimed Day is a welcome break from the largely instrumental opening track, and The Moon Touches Your Shoulder is atmospheric bliss. The rest of the album is largely instrumental, and while it is well constructed and doesn't seem like a mess, it's way too drawn out for my liking. Although the majority of both phases of the title track are listenable. The improvisation of Moonloop just doesn't do it for me, but the coded version of Moonloop is very nice and upbeat and a good way to end the album. The album gets a 2.5 out of 5 from me, and the 3 favourites are Stars Die, Moon Touches Your Shoulder, and Dislocated Day. This is another album that I haven't really fully sat down and listened to prior to writing this, but I do have standouts already, which I'll talk about at the end of the section. The first two tracks, Born, Live, Die and Signify, meld into each other seamlessly. And while many of the instrumentals in prior releases have been atmospheric, Signify is a bit heavier, which is a welcome change. The Sleep with No Dreaming, on the other hand, is where the album really starts to shine. Even though on the remaster the vocals are a bit drowned out, it actually suits the chorus, and like many other tracks previously in their discography, it's beautifully atmospheric but carries on some of the heavier elements of the title track. Drums are very prominent in the track. Like in the previous album, the instrumentals seem very deliberate and not as much as a mess as the first album, which is welcomed. Like The Sky Moves Sideways, Signify also has a track with two phases called Waiting. Phase 1 offers haunting vocals, which is no surprise given the discography we've spoken about so far. Phase 2 on the other hand is purely instrumental, but I definitely prefer it over the two-parter from the previous album. Sever is also pretty listenable. I appreciate how the album has breaks and then comes back with a really nice song, rather than just being heavy, heavy, heavy. Although not every song is heavy, it was a nice change in direction for Porcupine Tree, who largely prior to this album were releasing more atmospheric experiences. This also probably comes from the fact that it's the first full band album. While quite a bit of the album before Every Home Is Wide is heavier in nature, Every Home Is Wide takes a leaf out of the book of The Sleep with No Dreaming, but instead mixes acoustic guitar with haunting vocals. Like if you were to take the earlier mentioned Nine Cats and turn it into a drawn out atmospheric song or something like that, although I would say Nine Cats is more melodic than Every Home Is Wide. Every album so far has seemed to use the previous album's understanding of instrumentals and improve upon it, and Signify is no exception. Although some tracks do feature audio recordings, which they'd go on to use again in later releases. Not the same audio recordings, but the concept. Dark Matter is a beautiful way to end Signify. I think it's a 3 out of 5 for me, with the standouts being Dark Matter, The Sleep with No Dreaming, and Waiting, Phase 1. This was the album that I got that completed my physical studio album collection of the band. I was hesitant about it because of piano lessons and how different it seemed to everything else I had heard previously by the band. It was more upbeat than what I was used to, and that caught me off guard for a while, although I do really enjoy piano lessons and always have. The album starts off with the beautiful Even Less. I think the length of the Stupid Dream version is perfect. Piano Lessons is one of the more energetic songs in the entire Porcupine Tree discography. It's also where the title of the album comes from, despite the next song being the title track. The inclusion of a 28-second title track adds like nothing to the album. I also heard somewhere that it's the most accessible album of theirs, and I agree. It's what would be considered an attempt at mainstream music, but it's still very Porcupine Tree at the core. It's a beautiful album for the most part. Pure Narcotic and Slave Called Shiver are both great tracks as well. Don't Hate Me returns back to the haunting vocals, but everything on the album seems deliberate and like it was meant to be, which is a bit confusing to say because every track goes through planning and it was released how it was meant to be generally. But mostly it seems like it's in time with the rest of the song, and no strange time signatures and a natural progression, and no real surprises, just largely predictable, solid music. Don't Hate Me is the first song in the album that shows any real element of prolonged instrumental sections, but it's done well. The only real letdowns for the album, for me, are the title track and Tinto Brass. It took me a while to get into this album, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. And my 3 favourites are Even Less, Piano Lessons, and Pure Narcotic. 2000's Lightbulb Sun is undoubtedly the best title track up until that point of their career, and potentially the best title track in the band's career as a whole. It's heavy and emotional, yet takes a step back at the exact right time, and the inclusion of the guitar riffs just make the song exceptional. How Is Your Life Today is an immediate shift in tone, with a piano-led think piece with a trademark haunting vocals. 4 Chords That Made a Million, to me, tries to make a point, but it's not something I routinely go back to and listen to in its own right. She's Moved On is another classic song from the album, although there's always going to be a debate about if the Deadwing version is better. I personally prefer the Lightbulb Sun version. It's followed by the highly underappreciated, in my opinion, Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth Before It Is Recycled, which is followed by The Rest Will Flow and Hate Song. What a great sequence of songs. In fact, add Where Would We Be to that list too. Then comes the overhyped Russia on Ice. And while it is considered one of their best songs in their whole discography, I've never gotten into it. I don't like the song as a whole. I like parts of it and I like the vocals as a whole, but it just feels like it's way too drawn out, and honestly, because of this, I struggle to listen to it. the whole way through. But if you enjoy it, then you do you. But I don't get the hype around it, and I never have. Feel So Low also has the lovely haunting vocals, but outside of that, I don't overly enjoy it, no comparison to the rest of the album. The first 8 tracks as a collection are nearly flawless, but for this reason, I'm giving this album also 4 out of 5 as well, with my 3 picks being Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth, Hate Song, and Lightbulb Sun. 2002's In Absentia is, I think, hailed as their masterpiece, but another one of the albums that I haven't dedicated a lot of time to. But here's my thoughts on what I know of the album, and what I don't know of the album I'll write about as I re-listen to it. First and second tracks of the album have the most plays of any of their tracks on Spotify, and for good reason. Blackest Eyes and Trains are beautiful songs for beautiful reasons. Blackest Eyes is a heavier song for the band, but it all just goes together perfectly. And Trains, on the other hand, is a haunting track that blends the acoustic start with the drums to perfection, and the at times lingering vocals suit the song to perfection, along with the phases of the song changing seamlessly. Lips of Ashes is the first down point of the album compared to the opening 2 tracks. It isn't as melodic and quite repetitive, although as the album has some heavier tracks, it's nice to take a break from that. The Sound of Music was a track that I was quite hesitant towards at first, but it's grown on me for sure, and it's one of the highlights of the album for me. Gravity Eyelids largely struggles from the same things as Lips of Ashes, repetition, and not overly interesting arrangements repeated either. But just like with Lips of Ashes, after a softer song, the next track is heavier, and it's called Wedding Nails, and while its instrumental is an interesting track, it could easily be sung over by someone if they wanted to. That's what generally makes good instrumental, not to show off instruments, but a track that stands well on its own, and some tracks in music sound awful as instrumentals, and some work better alone. In the case of Wedding Nails, it sounds good as an instrumental, although its 6.5 minute runtime could be seen as too long, which is an odd thing to say when Porcupine Tree are known as a prog rock band. Prodigal meets the mixture of heavy and soft in the middle. The album seems a bit confused about what it's trying to be, but in saying that, it has a lot more direction than The Sunday of Life. It's just not constant enough in my opinion. One song will be soft, another will be heavier, and it'll go back and forth doing that. Although Prodigal was a good song and an example of what they did right with the album. The end of Prodigal seamlessly turns into the larger instrumental Point 3, which thankfully keeps some of the same themes as the previous song and could have easily been turned into a single track for the album, combining it with Prodigal. Creator as a Masterpiece really takes the album on a left turn, and a good one at that. Knowing the context behind the lyrics in the song really helps it make sense, although the distorted vocals are arguably overdone. It's still a solo track on the album, and the heavy parts really shine. Heart Attack in a Lay-By is another track that seamlessly transitions from its predecessor, which isn't a bad thing. It's a good song and goes well with the Creator as a Masterpiece. It's just a confusing start when you listen to it on its own. Heart Attack has haunting vocals once again, and a lovely piano presence with the softer and deliberate guitar. Collapse the Light into Earth is a great way to finish the album. While In Absentia is maybe more of a complete album than Stupid Dream and a lot clearer in its direction, it still fails at some hurdles, even though its high points are higher than anything prior to the album. It's going to have to be another 4 out of 5, with the standouts being Trains, Blackest Eyes, and Sound of Music. 2005 saw the release of Deadwing, which may be most famous for the 12-minute epic Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, but it very much stands on its own 2 feet outside of that, and it really hammers down its direction, unlike any other Porcupine Tree album prior. The album blends elements from previous releases and somehow expands upon it and almost perfects it. The title track Deadwing starts the album and has a perfect mix of soft and heavy guitar along with the vocals, and is without a doubt my favourite opening track of any of their albums. Sorry Lightbulb Sun. The album is also an indication that Porcupine Tree were working with what they knew and knew that they didn't have to make a long album to make a good one. The album only having 9 tracks. Shallow continues the heavier themes as the title track and also includes a killer chorus with really nice vocals. Lazarus is my most played by the band on Spotify, and I think that's all I need to say about it. I could dedicate a whole video to how beautiful this album is, but I won't. Halo is great, and Arriving Somewhere is one of the best songs they've ever made. The trademark haunting vocals and acoustic guitar return for the beautiful melatonin scratch. An Open Car is just as beautiful as any other track on the album, and goes heavier when it needs to. There's also a really beautiful bass line in it. And the way it's heavier and then really calm for the majority of the chorus, it's bliss. The start of Something Beautiful is more mellow than the rest of the album, but it definitely stands on its own 2 feet as a song. Last Arm Shattering is also a lot more mellow than the rest of the album, but it feels a bit strange having something so mellow and heartfelt on an album with such heavy parts, but once again, it's a great song in its own right. As a complete album, I think the last 2 tracks let down on consistency. Although I adore the album, I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5, with my 3 favourites being Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, Lazarus, and Open Car. Fear of a Blank Planet is the shortest album to date by Porcupine Tree with only 6 tracks, but what a 6 they are, with only real one weakness, but I'll get to that. I also think it complements this album that it sounds incredible live, maybe even better than the studio album. The first 2 tracks, the title track and My Ashes, are beautiful. Like Deadwing, it has elements of heavier music but also softer tracks, which work exceptionally. But my issue, honestly, is the nearly 18-minute epic Anesthetized. I don't really like it. I really enjoy the first part of it, the first track of 3 inside a song, but after that, I don't really like it. I'd much rather it be 3 separate songs, and I can just listen to the first one and skip the other 2. The other 3 tracks, Sentimental, Way Out of Here, and Sleep Together, are beautiful as well. I'm giving this album 4 out of 5 again, with the 1 being taken off for Anesthetized, with my 3 favourite songs being My Ashes, Sentimental, and Fear of a Blank Planet. 2009's The Incident is the last album on the list, and while the 2 previous albums didn't feature any purely instrumental tracks, The Incident starts with one. The album was supposedly supposed to be a single 55-minute song, but was divided into 14 tracks, including the masterpiece that is Time Flies. Worth noting that 8 of the 14 tracks are under 3 minutes long, and the majority of those 8 are just over 2 minutes, or below the 2-minute mark. Also, the album is divided into 2 CDs, and I'm just going to talk about the first disc because it is The Incident. The first track with vocals is entitled The Blind House, which starts off rather heavy, which was normal for Porcupine Tree by 2009. They had songs from abstract to some genre of metal, also quite like Porcupine Tree. Blind House goes a lot softer for the first verse, but it's heavier when the chorus is present, and really reminds me of Nirvana at times. The album takes elements from the previous album, but it doesn't seem as clear in its direction. Due to the inclusion of instrumentals and short songs, there's nothing wrong with shorter songs, and great exceptions flows seamlessly into Kneel and Disconnect. But I still get a bit confused as to why it isn't just one song. It makes them tricky to listen to on their own, because they're almost missing context but in song form. I do also understand that the album was not made with streaming in mind, and it was made purely as a sit down and listen to it from beginning to end to have the full experience kind of thing. I appreciate it for that. Drawing the line also seamlessly goes on from Kneel and Disconnect, but it can also stand on its own because it's a pretty decent track. Although The Incident is probably the weakest title track to date, it also feels strange to go from Your Unpleasant Family, which is a nice little track, to an instrumental, to the monster that is Time Flies. Degree Zero of Liberty starts the same way as the opening track, but has quite a nice mellow section, despite it being rather similar to the opening track. Octane Twisted got a live album named after it, and it's one of the better songs on the album, definitely in the top half, although it is largely instrumental, and although the melody of the instrumental is nice, it seems messy most of the time. The Seance, despite being short, is a good step in the right direction. It has lovely vocals and doesn't seem at all messy, like it has a plan and knows how to achieve it. It kind of ties into Circle of Manias, with the ending being a softer take on the start of Circle of Manias. It's an instrumental that just seems out of place, honestly. The album ends with the beautiful I Drive the Hearse. And the album gets a 2.5 out of 5 from me, and my 3 favourites are Time Flies, I Drive the Hearse, and Kneel and Disconnect. That's watching the first episode of First to Last, where I take the band and talk about their discography from their first album to their last almost recent album. I also plan on doing this with movies. I'm thinking like maybe there's a trilogy. I might talk about the first movie, the second movie, and the third movie in chronological order. I think it's an interesting concept. It's meant to kind of take the best to worst genre and kind of turn it on its head. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. Maybe there may be some opinions you didn't agree with. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. More than happy to have a discussion. I really enjoy Porcupine Tree. as a whole, and I don't think I could confidently give a top 10 songs or top 20 songs or anything like that, or top 3 albums would even be difficult. But yeah. Also, if you're into Lost Media, there's a playlist that's on screen now called Lost Media by